A tense robbery explodes into chaos when a racist gang underestimates an unassuming black woman and her fiercely loyal dog. The incident, meant to be a quick hit, becomes the start of their slow unraveling. A single symbolic moment flips. The power dynamic forever. Full introduction. You people don't fight back anyway. The words slithered through the humid night air like poison. At the corner of Park Row and Jefferson Avenue, under the flickering orange street lamp, 3 figures closed in, shadows stretching long over cracked concrete. The shops were shuttered, their metal grates down. No one was supposed to be watching. No one except an old security camera, perched like a blind eye above the drugstore sign. The leader, a thick-set man with a baseball bat slung across his shoulder, spat into the gutter and grinned. His name was Troy, a name whispered around these parts whenever something ugly happened after dark. Beside him, Mason, wiry and twitchy, flexed his fingers around a switchblade. And behind them, Deke, the youngest, kept laughing nervously, eager to prove himself. Across the cracked sidewalk stood a lone black woman, slim, mid-30s maybe, dressed in simple jeans and a faded hoodie. A leash hung from her hand, and at the other end of it, a dog. Not a hulking beast, but a lean, sinewy black Belgian Malinois sitting perfectly still at her side, alert, watching, breathing low. The woman, her name was Amara, didn't flinch, didn't step back, didn't scream. She only stared. Her dark eyes soaking in every line of their faces like a courtroom witness, already filing the evidence away. No one else was outside. Inside the apartments above, lights flickered behind grimy curtains. People peeked, then closed their blinds. Park Row was that kind of neighborhood now. Troy swaggered forward, tapping the bat against a newspaper stand as he passed. Clang, clang. Each hit rang out louder than the last. "You deaf lady?" he sneered. "Hand it over, purse, phone, keys, jewelry." He jabbed the bat toward her chest. "Or maybe," he added, voice thick with venom, "we just take whatever we want anyway. Ain't nobody coming to help you." Amara tilted her head slightly, as if studying an insect. The dog's ears pricked forward, but it stayed rooted to the ground, muscles taut like drawn wires. Troy scoffed, glancing back at Mason and Deke. "See? They always freeze up. Think they're so strong with their protests and their marches. But when it's real life," he snapped his fingers, "they just stand there." Mason laughed, flashing the blade. Deke whistled low, taking a bold step closer. "Bet she got an iPhone in that pocket. Maybe a fat wallet, too." Troy nodded, gave an exaggerated bow. "Last chance, sweetheart." Still, Amara didn't move, didn't blink, didn't speak. Instead, with almost surgical calm, she did something none of them expected. She unclipped the dog's leash. Click. It was such a soft sound, so small, but it cracked the night wide open. The dog, unleashed, did not leap forward immediately. Instead, it stood, body tight as a drawn bow, eyes locked onto Troy like a sniper's scope finding its mark. Finally, Amara spoke. Her voice was low, calm, terrifying. "My dog has better judgment than you." For a beat, everything hung suspended. The bat mid-air, the switchblade trembling, Deke's grin wilting into confusion. Then the dog moved, not blindly, not with rage, but with trained, precise, devastating purpose. It lunged straight for the wrist holding the bat, jaws clamping down with mechanical efficiency. Troy screamed, a high, thin, broken sound, as the bat clattered uselessly to the pavement. Mason lunged with the blade, but caught only air as the dog pivoted, snarling, forcing them back, herding them like cattle. Amara stepped forward, silent, her shadow stretching across the cracked pavement, a queen reclaiming her court. Each step she took tightened an invisible noose around them. Inside the apartments above, curtains twitched open again. This time no one looked away. Phones appeared in windows. Cameras started rolling. The hunters had become the hunted, and Amara, with a small, almost imperceptible smile, knew exactly how this would end. They thought she was just another easy mark on a forgotten street. They never imagined they'd just declared war, not just against her, but against everything she stood for, and her dog. He was only getting started. Troy stumbled backward, clutching his bleeding wrist, the bat forgotten on the concrete. His howl echoed down the street, bouncing off shuttered windows and rusted fire escapes. Mason cursed, lunging forward with the switchblade, but the dog, sleek as shadow, relentless as death, anticipated every move. A growl, low and bone-deep, vibrated through the air. It was not the sound of anger. It was the sound of certainty. Mason faltered. In his mind, he'd expected an easy win, a helpless woman, a trembling dog. Not this, not an enemy that stared him down with calculated coldness. Deke, still rooted, to the spot, dropped the chain he'd been twirling and took a shaky step back. His sneakers squeaked against the pavement. The spell of invincibility they'd wrapped themselves in all night tore like cheap paper. "You crazy lady!" Mason barked, voice cracking. "Control your mutt!" Amara said nothing. She didn't have to. The dog advanced another step, sending a clear, chilling message. "Move closer, and you'll leave a piece of yourself behind." The spell was broken by the wail of sirens in the distance. Faint, but growing louder. Mason glanced at Troy, whose face was twisted in pain and rage. "We gotta bounce," Mason hissed. Troy hesitated, pride wrestling with survival, then spat bloodily into the street. "This ain't over," he growled, voice shaking more than he probably realized. They fled into the night, half tripping over themselves, a pathetic trio dragging their egos behind them like broken toys. Amara stood still for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the world shift just slightly around her. Then she knelt, reattaching the leash to her dog's collar with slow, deliberate movements. "Good boy, Onyx," she murmured, running a hand along the sleek fur. Onyx panted once, tongue lolling out, tail wagging low but proud. The camera flashes. From the windows above flickered like fireworks. Faces once hidden behind fear now watched her openly. Witnesses, receipts. Amara slipped her phone from her pocket. No cracked screen, no stolen purse. She tapped the record button, scanned the street, the dropped bat, the splatter of blood, the abandoned switchblade, capturing every scrap of evidence. This wasn't just a lucky escape. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. An hour later, Amara sat on the worn leather couch of her small, book-stuffed apartment 3 blocks away. Onyx lay at her feet, chewing lazily on a bone. On the coffee table, her phone, screen glowing with saved videos, a battered laptop, already humming to life, a stack of old documents, legal pads, and, tucked underneath it all, a badge. Not a police badge, not a prosecutor's badge, but something close enough. A Department of Justice ID, expired technically, but the connections it represented were still very much alive. Amara leaned back, rubbing her temples. She hadn't planned on becoming a public figure again. Not after everything she walked away from 2 years ago, the politics, the betrayals, the deafening silence when she needed allies most. But some fights didn't give you the courtesy of asking permission. Sometimes they kicked down your door in the middle of the night, baseball bat in hand. She sighed, opened a blank email, attached the videos, typed a subject line, "Incident on Park Row, potential hate crime evidence," and sent it to 3 addresses. 1 to her old law professor, 1 to an activist she trusted like family, and 1 to a private investigator who owed her more favors than he cared to admit. Meanwhile, across town, in a cramped, smoke-choked apartment above a pawnshop, Troy paced like a caged animal. Mason sat on the arm of a torn couch, holding a bag of frozen peas to his bruised ribs. Deke scrolled mindlessly through his phone, every so often glancing at the door like it might explode open any second. She set her damn dog on us, Troy growled for the 50th time. She could have killed us. Mason muttered, "You swung first, man." "And you ran first," Troy shot back, venom dripping from every word. Deke cleared his throat. "Maybe we, chill for a bit? Let it blow over?" Troy rounded on him. "You think this gonna just blow over?" He jabbed a finger toward the window. "Half the damn block saw it. They got cameras, phones. You want to be a meme? You want to be the headline, 'Big Bad Racist Gets Owned by Lady and Her Dog'?" Deke shrank into the couch, cheeks burning. Troy's mind raced. They couldn't let it spread. They couldn't let her feel like she'd won. He cracked his knuckles. "We find her," he said finally, voice low and furious, "before she finds anyone who matters." Back in her apartment, Amara was already 2 steps ahead. The emails were sent, the wheels were turning. She leaned down, kissed the top of Onyx's head, and whispered, "Time to remind them what loyalty really looks like, boy." Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, impatient. But under the skin of the streets, under the blinking lights and grinding gears, something ancient and unstoppable stirred awake. Justice, and this time, it had teeth. The video hit the internet like a slow-moving thunderstorm. First a whisper, then a rumble, then a roar. At 7:42 a.m., a teenager named Malik posted the clip to his barely followed TikTok account under the caption, "Lady and Her. Dog went off justice, Dusher Park Row." By 9 a.m. it had 14,000 views. By noon, it had been shared by 2 activist pages, 1 local news station, and a viral Twitter account known for exposing racial injustices. By 3 p.m., it was everywhere. The footage was raw and unfiltered, the gang's arrogant approach, the threat, the sudden, devastating counterstrike by a dog that moved like poetry sharpened into a blade, and Amara standing silent and still as statues of old heroes while the men fled in disgrace. The internet did what it always did. It dissected, it memed, it weaponized screenshots, circulated with captions like, "When your racism meets the wrong dog, that's not a pet, that's a bodyguard." She stood like a queen watching fools kneel. But under the humor, under the viral momentum, something far weightier built: outrage. Not just at the gang, at the system that allowed predators like them to roam free, confident no one would protect a black woman alone at night. In her apartment, Amara sat at the kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and scrolling through notifications. With cool detachment, Onyx dozed at her feet, his chest rising and falling steadily. Her inbox pinged, then pinged again and again. Interview requests, offers from lawyers and activists, messages from strangers thanking her, calling her a symbol, asking her how they could help. Amara closed the laptop with a sigh. She wasn't interested in being anyone's symbol. Symbols were too easy to destroy. What she needed was leverage. She needed to flip this moment, this flash of viral fame, into something that could actually last. Something that could actually tear at the rot that made monsters like Troy think they ruled the night. She pulled out a yellow notepad and started writing. Public pressure, Taunge, good exposure, Taunge, temporary. Real power, Taunge, evidence, plus names. She tapped the pen against the page, thinking. There was an opportunity here, a pressure point. If she pushed just right, she could shatter more than just one gang's ego. Across town, Troy watched the video for the first time, and the second, and the third, each a time. His face darkened. "You see this sit?" he snarled, flinging the burner phone across the room. It bounced off the cracked drywall and clattered to the floor. Mason and Deke sat stiffly on the couch, faces pale. "She's making us look like jokes," Mason muttered. "Like cowards," Deke added. Troy paced, hands clenching and unclenching. The video wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. It painted them as racists, as weak, as targets, and people loved nothing more than kicking a man when he was already down. Troy stopped, turning sharply toward them. "No more hiding," he said. "We find her. We shut her up, whatever it takes." Deke shifted nervously. "Bro, we can't just... She got a dog. She got people filming. You see all those activists tagging her. She's not alone." Troy's lip curled. He didn't care. Fear wasn't something he entertained. At least that's what he told himself. But somewhere deep in his gut, a worm of unease was starting to squirm, a whisper he couldn't quite silence. "You already lost. You just haven't accepted it yet." He slammed the thought aside. Tomorrow night they'd find her, one way or another. That evening, as the sun bled red into the city skyline, Amara walked Onyx through a different part of the neighborhood, one buzzing with life, street vendors, children playing, music spilling from open windows. She moved. Differently now. Not with fear, but with sharp, deliberate awareness. Every alley, every doorway, every face, catalogued, every car engine revving too loud, noted. Onyx sensed it too. He moved in perfect step with her, his black coat gleaming under the dying light, his ears flicking at every sound. Amara wasn't stupid. She knew the gang would come looking for her. She was counting on it. Because when they did, when they made their next move, she'd be ready. And this time, it wouldn't just be a dog's teeth or a viral video waiting for them. It would be something permanent, something legal, something that would chain them to the consequences of their own hatred. She ducked into a small bodega, smiling politely at the elderly shopkeeper, bought a burner phone, prepaid SIM cards, a few supplies. On her way out, she caught her reflection in the scratched mirror by the door, a woman the world had tried to erase, still standing, still fighting. "Let's get to work," she whispered to Onyx. The dog thumped his tail once, low and steady. Later that night, in a corner of the internet where activists organized and truth traveled faster than lies, a new hashtag began to trend, Onyx Justice, and beneath it a simple message: you underestimated the wrong woman and her dog. Night fell over Park Row like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The kind of night where bad decisions are born. The kind of night Amara had been waiting for. She sat on her apartment floor, laptop open, a notepad filled with messy scribbles beside her. Onyx lay nearby, head resting on his paws, one ear cocked, always listening. Amara's plan wasn't complicated. It didn't have to be. The trick was letting Troy believe he still held the upper hand, just long enough to walk into his own downfall. She tapped out a message from the new burner phone. Back at the corner, same time, alone. She posted it, anonymously to a local community board known for its underground traffic, a place Troy's kind would be sure to watch. She paired it with a blurry photo of herself from behind, standing at the Park Row corner, with Onyx at her side. The bait was set. At the pawnshop hideout, the mood had curdled into something ugly and brittle. Mason fidgeted on the couch, flicking. His lighter open and closed. Deke wiped sweat from his forehead, even though the room was cold. Troy sat by the window, staring into the dark, jaw clenching rhythmically. The phone buzzed. Deke grabbed it, eyes widening. "Yo, look at this." He tossed it to Troy, who squinted at the screen. The post, the picture, the challenge. She was taunting them or daring them. Troy's vision blurred with rage. He could practically hear the laughter, not just from the woman but from everyone online. The memes, the jokes, the whispers behind his back. He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the empty beer cans. "We're not letting her get away with this," he said, voice low and vicious. Mason hesitated. "Man, maybe we should let it go." "Ain't worth it now." Troy turned on him so fast Mason flinched. "You scared?" Mason didn't answer. He didn't have to. Deke spoke up, desperate to steer the heat away. "We could bring backup this time. You know, a few more guys, just in case." Troy sneered. "Fine, but we're doing this clean, no guns, no stupid mistakes." He didn't say what they all knew. They were already standing in the middle of a stupid mistake, but it was too late to turn back. Amara moved through the evening like a shadow. She didn't return to the Park Row corner immediately. That would have been reckless. Instead, she set her pieces in place. First stop, a building across the street from the drugstore. An old, half-abandoned office with a clear view of the corner. Inside, she had stashed a portable tripod, a high-end camera borrowed from an activist friend, and a second burner phone ready to record and stream simultaneously. Every angle would be covered. Second stop, a discreet message to a few trusted people. Local watchdogs, citizen journalists, even a retired cop who ran a neighborhood patrol. Stand by. Possible escalation tonight. Park Row, short, clean, enough to light a fuse without giving herself away. Third stop, herself. She changed clothes, dark jeans, black boots, a leather jacket, nothing flashy. Something she could move easily in. And Onyx? He was ready. He always was. Amara knelt beside him, checked his tactical harness one last time. Light, comfortable, built for mobility. A small camera attached to his collar blinked red, recording everything from his eye level. She stroked his head, meeting his intelligent, unwavering gaze. "Stay close, boy, but if I tell you, run." Onyx nudged her hand with his nose, a silent promise, "I won't leave you, not ever." 57 p.m. The night breathed around them. The city hummed, restless, indifferent. Amara stood at the Park Row corner, exactly where the post had said she would be, hands loose at her sides. Head high, Onyx by her left foot, so still he might have been carved from obsidian. The broken street lamp above her sputtered weakly, throwing uneven shadows across the sidewalk. She waited and waited. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching, tighter than the last. Footsteps at first distant, then closer, boots scuffing asphalt. Low, ugly laughter. Troy emerged from the darkness, followed by Mason, Deke, and two new faces she didn't recognize. One tall and skinny with a mean look. One thick-necked, dragging a chain in his fist. 5 against 1. At least, that's what they thought. Troy's lip curled into a predatory smile. "Look who's still dumb enough to show up." Amara didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't speak. Troy stepped closer, emboldened. "Thought you learned your lesson, girl," Mason chuckled nervously. The two new thugs fanned out, blocking the exit. "Our routes." Deke hung back, jittery, eyes darting to every shadow. Amara simply tilted her head, a small, imperious gesture, and then she said, quiet enough that they had to lean closer to hear, "I wasn't here to run." Troy barked a laugh. "No? Then what?" Amara smiled, and cold and dangerous. "I was here to end this." A tiny beep chirped from Onyx's harness. The cameras were rolling, the live stream had begun, and in a dozen dark apartments across the city, watchers gasped as they realized what they were seeing in real time, not a robbery, a setup, a reckoning. Troy's smile faltered. For the first time he looked around, really looked, and noticed the glint of glass in windows, the faint glow of cell phones held up like torches, the hum of a watching city awakening. He opened, his mouth, to threaten, to bluster. But it was too late. From behind the old office building, 2 plainclothes officers emerged, flashing badges. From the mouth of the alley, 3 more men and women approached. Cameras in hand, live streams active. They weren't here to stop the attack. They were here to expose it, permanently. For the first time since the night they first crossed her path, Troy understood. They hadn't hunted a victim. They had stepped into a carefully laid snare, and the woman standing calmly in front of them, dog at her side, wasn't prey. She was the hunter. For a split second, time froze. Troy stood there, caught between his instinct to charge and his rising, gnawing fear. Around him, the streets weren't empty anymore. They were alive. Witnesses everywhere, eyes, cameras, history recording every breath he took. Mason was the first to crack. He cursed under his breath, spinning on his heel and bolting toward the alleyway. Deke followed without a word, disappearing into the darkness. The two newcomers hesitated just long enough to realize no backup was coming, and then scattered like cockroaches under a spotlight. Only Troy stayed rooted in place, frozen, exposed, alone. Amara didn't chase them. She didn't need to. Every step they ran, every desperate move, was caught and streamed, magnified across 1,000 screens. She simply watched, Onyx at her side, eyes unblinking. The two plainclothes officers approached Troy slowly, hands up, non-threatening. "You can leave quietly," one said, voice calm, "or you can make it worse." Troy's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, every fiber of his being screamed to lash out, to reclaim some shred of control. But he wasn't stupid. Not anymore. Not with the whole city watching. He spat at the ground near Amara's boots, a final, impotent gesture, and stalked away into the night. The officers didn't stop him. They weren't here to arrest. They were here to witness. Hours later, the videos flooded every corner of the internet. New hashtags exploded across platforms. Dus Park Row Trap, Stand with Amara, Dus Justice with Teeth news anchors debated it. Podcasters dissected it. Activists celebrated it. A black woman, unarmed but for her dog and her resolve, had turned the tables not just on a gang, but on a system that had long taught her to fear, and people were hungry for more. They weren't just outraged. They were energized. In a cramped basement apartment across town, Troy hurled his phone against the wall. "This is your fault," he roared at Deke, who flinched so hard he nearly fell off the chair. "She tricked us, man," Deke whined. "She ain't. Normal, she planned the whole thing." Mason, pale and sweating, muttered, "Whole damn city's against us now. My sister won't even let me near her house. Says I'm bad for her kids." Troy paced like a caged beast. "This ain't over," he said, voice low and cracked with desperation. "They want to make a show? Fine, we'll give 'em a real one." But even as he said it, he knew something fundamental had shifted. The old rules didn't apply anymore. The streets that once belonged to men like him had turned cold and unfamiliar, and somewhere deep in his chest, a fear he couldn't name began to grow. Back in her apartment, Amara finally let herself relax, just a little. She stood at the window, arms crossed, watching the city pulse with restless energy. The hashtags, the interviews she hadn't agreed to yet, the offers from law firms and media outlets, it was all noise. What mattered was what came next, because Amara hadn't laid her trap just to embarrass a few thugs. That was just the opening move. The real targets were bigger, the silent ones, the ones who saw and said nothing, the ones who would have let her bleed out on that sidewalk without lifting a finger. This wasn't about one night. It was about decades, generations. It was about the rot in the bones of the city, and she wasn't. Done yet, not by a long shot. Downstairs, in the empty lot behind the old drugstore, someone spray-painted a fresh mural on the cracked brick wall. A woman standing with a black dog at her side, both facing a rising sun, and underneath it, in bold black letters, "Loyalty has teeth." The next morning, the city didn't wake up the same. It was as if the ground had shifted, the air itself sharper, more electric. At every coffee shop counter, at every bus stop, in whispered conversations at work, people talked about her. The woman with the dog. The one who fought back without lifting a hand, the one who made them run. Amara didn't seek it, she didn't chase it, but the tide was moving on its own now, pulling her name, her story, her image into the bloodstream of the city. Flyers appeared, overnight taped to light poles, a silhouette of Amara and Onyx, standing tall. The words "Loyalty over fear" splashed underneath in bold red paint. A local artist painted a mural in the subway. Amara's steady gaze immortalized in deep blues and golds, Onyx at her side like a shadow stitched to her soul. Online, Petitions sprang up demanding better street patrols, more cameras in neglected neighborhoods, faster response times for women of color reporting crimes. But it wasn't just about security. It was about dignity. For once, the story wasn't about tragedy. It was about resistance. It was about standing when everything told you to kneel, and it was all tied to her name, Amara. At the heart of it, Amara remained steady, focused, unwavering, because she knew how fickle public attention could be, how easily movements burned bright and then collapsed under their own weight. She wouldn't let that happen, not this time. She had meetings lined up now, not with reporters, but with organizers. People who had been fighting this war long before one viral night brought new eyes to it. In a quiet meeting room at a community center on West 22nd Street, Amara sat surrounded by faces old and young, fierce and hopeful. "We don't need another." "Hashtag," said an older woman, voice rough with wisdom. "We need lasting change." Amara nodded slowly. "We'll build something they can't ignore," she said. "And it starts here." She pulled out a folder thick with documents, evidence she had been quietly gathering since that night. Complaints ignored by police, patterns of harassment, gaps in patrol routes that left certain blocks deliberately vulnerable. She wasn't just preparing for another viral moment. She was preparing for a reckoning, and she wouldn't be alone. Meanwhile, Troy felt the walls closing in. He couldn't walk down the street without feeling eyes drilling into his back. Even the people he used to party with now crossed the street. When they saw him coming, he flipped through TV channels angrily in a dark motel room, every few minutes, landing on another story about her. About the movement she had sparked. He smashed the remote against the wall, breathing heavily. Deke and Mason sat silently on the edge of the bed, too scared to say anything. "She's nothing!" Troy shouted into the empty room. "Just some mouthy bitch with a mutt." But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow, false, desperate. Because deep down, Troy knew the truth. She wasn't nothing. She was everything he had feared. The future he couldn't control, the strength he couldn't crush. And now she had the city behind her. That night, Amara walked the same streets where it all began, not because she had to, because she wanted to. She moved with quiet authority now, Onyx padding beside her, his presence a silent warning. Children pointed when they saw her, tugging at their parents' sleeves. Mothers nodded at her with quiet pride. Men stepped aside, respectfully. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was leading. Outside a boarded-up building near Jefferson Avenue, someone had painted another fresh message: "You can't silence loyalty." Underneath it, someone had scribbled a second line, or "The truth." Amara smiled, small, fierce. The city was waking up, and there was no putting it back to sleep. Not now. Not ever. Troy stared at the grimy motel mirror, the fluorescent light above him flickering like it couldn't make up its mind whether to stay alive or give up. His reflection looked back at him, a twisted parody of the man he used to believe he was, leader, tough guy, king of the streets. Now he was a punchline. The anger boiled inside him until it was a living thing clawing at his ribs. "You see them talking about her like she's some damn hero?" he barked, throwing a beer bottle against the wall. It exploded into shards, a sharp sound that made Deke flinch. Mason muttered something under his breath. Troy turned on him immediately. "What?" Mason raised his hands. "Nothing, man, just saying, maybe it's time to let it go." Troy's nostrils flared. "Let it go? She humiliated us. She made us a freaking spectacle." He jabbed a finger toward the cracked motel TV, where a local news segment played muted footage of Amara speaking to a gathering crowd, Onyx seated loyally by her side. "She's building an army," Troy spat. "And if we don't stop her now, we'll be ghosts in our own city." Deke shifted uncomfortably. "Bro, cops are watching everything now. Everyone got cameras. You can't just do something crazy." Troy sneered. "That's the problem with you. You think small." He leaned in, voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I ain't talking about no street fight. I'm talking about burning her whole world down." At that same moment, across the city, Amara sat in the back of a crowded cafe that had become an unofficial headquarters. Flyers were stacked by the door. People lined up to volunteer, offering their phones to livestream, offering their homes as safe houses, offering their voices to the movement swelling around her name. Amara listened as a young man in a wheelchair spoke. "They used to ignore us, pretend we didn't exist," he said, voice steady. "Now they can't. Now they know we're watching." Amara nodded slowly, but inside she knew visibility was a double-edged sword. Attention didn't just attract allies, it attracted predators. Her mind raced through possibilities. Troy wasn't the kind to just slink away. Wounded pride in men like him was more dangerous than any weapon. She had to be ready, not just for herself, for everyone who now stood behind her. Meanwhile, Troy put his plan into motion. He reached out to old contacts, dirtbags who didn't care about hashtags, didn't watch the news, didn't give a damn about public outrage. Guys who worked for cash and ran when things got hot. They called it a reclamation job. Strip a woman of everything she thought made her untouchable. Send a message. Troy sat at a battered kitchen table, sketching on a yellowed street map. "First her apartment," he said. "Burn it down. No warnings." He stabbed his finger against the paper. "Then her little meetings. Scare the crowd. Let 'em know she's not safe, and neither are they." Mason shifted uneasily. "Dude, that's serious. You sure?" Troy's eyes glittered. Serious is the point. He was past thinking, past fearing consequences. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about punishing. But Troy's fatal mistake was assuming Amara was still playing defense. She wasn't. That night, Amara walked the perimeter of her apartment building, Onyx at her side. She checked the new cameras, disguised cleverly as broken light fixtures, checked the reinforced locks installed by friends in construction, checked the smoke detectors, upgraded to include early chemical fire alerts. She wasn't just ready to survive an attack, she was ready to trap it. Across the street, in an old Ford parked under a broken lamppost, 2 community volunteers sat, coffee thermoses steaming between them, radios crackling softly. "Sector 3 secure," one muttered into a walkie. Amara smiled faintly as she heard it. She wasn't alone anymore. Across the city, in another dingy motel, Troy loaded the trunk of a stolen car with gas cans, chains, and crowbars. Mason and Deke stood nearby, pale and sweating. "You boys ain't getting cold feet, are you?" Troy sneered. Mason shook his head, but Deke mumbled, "Maybe we ought to think about—" Troy slammed the trunk shut so hard it rattled the whole car. "We ain't thinking, we're doing." He pulled a battered handgun from his belt. Not to shoot, he said, just to keep 'em scared. But the way his hand tightened around the grip said otherwise. This wasn't a message anymore. This was a war. 37 p.m. The city breathed heavy under the blanket of night. In a small apartment crammed with monitors and wires, a volunteer named Javier watched through the security feed. He frowned. A suspicious car had just circled Amara's block for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. He keyed the walkie. "Possible incoming. Code red." Across the street, Amara's allies stirred into action. Lights flicked off. Cameras went live. Phones started streaming. The trap was springing itself. Amara stood at her window, watching without blinking. Onyx bristled, sensing the storm coming. "Steady, boy," she whispered. The darkness split with the roar of an engine as the stolen car screeched to a halt near her building. Troy and his men spilled out, carrying jugs of gasoline, masked by black hoodies pulled. No one held a chain. One carried the crowbar, and Troy, the fool, gripped the gun too tightly, too obviously. They didn't know they were walking straight into a web spun tighter than steel. They didn't know the entire city was already watching. Across town, thousands of people's phones buzzed with alerts. Live, Racist gang attempts retaliation against Park Row. Hero feeds flickered to life, showing Troy and his crew mid-crime, mid-collapse, mid-damnation. The world watched, and this time, there would be no escaping the consequences. Amara stepped into the hall, Onyx by her side, both bathed in the silent glow of security lights. The moment she had waited for had finally arrived. No fear, no anger, only justice and loyalty, with teeth. The street outside Amara's building crackled with tension, thick as a storm about to break. Troy stormed toward the front steps, gas cans sloshing dangerously in his hand. Mason and Deke hovered. Behind him, nervous wrecks, their eyes darting between the shadows. The two newcomers followed blindly, adrenaline masking their fear. They thought they were unseen. They thought they were untouchable. But they were wrong. Every window on the block seemed to hum with hidden cameras, every dark corner hiding a witness. Live streams blinked and flickered from phones, drones buzzed quietly above the rooftops, and 1,000 unseen eyes drank in every reckless step they took. Amara stood just inside the lobby, Onyx at her side. No shaking. No flinching. This was what she had prepared for. This was what she had built. Onyx's tail gave one slow thump against the floor. Not excitement, but readiness. "Let them come," Amara whispered, and they did. Troy was first through the door. Boot, slamming against it hard enough to make it rattle on its hinges. He raised the gas can high, ready to douse the lobby in flames. But as he stepped into the light, he froze. Because facing him wasn't just Amara and her dog. It was a full circle of people. Volunteers, neighbors, live streamers, even 2 undercover officers, surrounding him in silence, dozens of phones raised like weapons, filming every move, every breath. Troy's mouth worked soundlessly. For a second he looked like a little boy caught stealing cookies, not a monster ready to commit. Orson. Behind him, Mason and Deke skidded to a stop. "What the hell?" Mason muttered, eyes wide with horror. Deke dropped the crowbar with a loud clatter, the sound ringing through the lobby like a gunshot. Outside, sirens wailed closer, fast, urgent. Troy spun around, realizing too late that he was boxed in. "This ain't what it looks like," he shouted hoarsely, voice cracking under the weight of panic. But no one was listening, because it was exactly what it looked like. The first squad car screeched to a halt against the curb, then another, and another. Uniformed officers spilled out, weapons drawn but cautious, instantly clocking the situation. One of them, a black woman with a lieutenant's badge glinting under the streetlight, stepped forward. She didn't yell. She didn't bark commands. She simply pointed at Troy and said, "On the ground, now." For a moment, Troy looked like he might run, fight, something, but he didn't, because even he understood. You don't fight the future. You just drown under it. He dropped the gas can, raised his hands, and went to his knees. Handcuffs clicked, sharp and final around his wrists. Mason and Deke followed, faces pale, sweat dripping down their temples. The 2 newcomers tried to bolt, but didn't get 5 feet before officers tackled them onto the sidewalk. From the crowd, a cheer went up, not cruel but victorious, not because pain had been answered with more pain, but because for once the system moved when it was supposed to. For once, silence didn't win. Amara watched from the doorway, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, Onyx leaning warmly against her leg. She didn't smile. Not yet. Justice wasn't a moment. It was a beginning. Later, sitting on the hood of a car across the street, she let Onyx drink from a bowl of cool water offered by a neighbor. She stroked his head slowly, watching the flashing blue and red lights fade as the police vans pulled away. The journalists would call it a turning point. The commentators would call it a symbolic victory. Amara didn't care about any of that, because for the first time, in a long, long time, she felt something deeper than anger. She felt momentum, and she wasn't going to waste it. Across the city, The footage of Troy's downfall dominated the airwaves. News anchors described it breathlessly, a neighborhood united, a silent uprising. A woman and her dog bringing justice where there was none. Social media exploded again, this time not just with outrage, but with hope. In an apartment 5 blocks away, a teenage girl watched Amara's speech on her cracked phone and whispered, "Maybe we can fight too." In a nursing home downtown, an old man in a worn veteran's cap wiped a tear from his eye and said, "It's about damn time." In a classroom across the river, a teacher paused her lesson, turned on the jazz news, and let her students watch history unfold. Amara didn't know all these people. She didn't need to, because the truth she had unleashed was no longer hers to carry alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to stay quiet, to sit down, to survive instead of live. And it would carry forward, louder, fiercer, hungrier than any gang ever could, as the first light of dawn broke over the city, painting the streets gold and soft pink. Amara walked home with Onyx trotting proudly at her side. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but tonight the city had remembered something vital. It had teeth, and it had loyalty, and it had voices too loud to silence ever again. For a few blessed hours, the city breathed easier. No sirens, no screaming headlines, just a fragile, humming silence, the kind that follows a thunderstorm when the world holds its breath. But beneath that calm, aftershocks rippled, and Amara, more than anyone, knew it. The next morning, her face was everywhere. News banners, talk shows, magazine covers hastily redesigned overnight to feature her and Onyx under bold titles like "The Woman Who Wouldn't Bow," "Justice Unleashed," "The Dog That Defended a City Her Phone Wouldn't Stop Buzzing." Voicemails piled up from reporters, activists, politicians, even celebrities trying to align themselves with her story. Everyone wanted a piece of her. Everyone wanted her to stand on their stage, say their words, fit their narrative. Amara sat in the kitchen, a half-eaten slice of toast forgotten on her plate, staring at the avalanche of messages. Onyx rested his head on her lap, sensing her tension. "You started a revolution, boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "Now they want to own it." The thought sent a cold shiver down her spine, because Amara hadn't set out to be a leader. She wasn't interested in speeches or awards. She wanted change, real, messy, painful change, and she knew that wouldn't come from hashtags or polished sound bites. It would come from truth, ugly, stubborn, unglamorous truth, dragged screaming into the light. Later that afternoon, Amara met with her closest circle, the people who had been with her before the world noticed. When it was just a few angry neighbors and a loyal dog standing against the dark, they gathered at a small community center with peeling paint and flickering lights. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs. "We need to be smart," said Javier, the tech wizard who had rigged the cameras. "They're already spinning it, making it about one dog, one woman, like this isn't about all of us." "Exactly," chimed in Rosa, a fiery activist who had once faced eviction for speaking up against police harassment. "If they turn her into a superhero, they can pretend the system's fine, like she's just special, instead of the proof that the system's broken." All eyes turned to Amara. She leaned forward, hands clasped loosely between her knees. "We don't let them," she said simply. "We control the story." "But how?" asked Malik, a young student who had filmed part of Troy's downfall. From his bedroom window, Amara's voice was quiet but unshakable. "By refusing to play their game." That night, while late-night hosts cracked jokes about Superdog and glossy news anchors gushed about the inspiring story of Park Row, Amara launched something different. No TV interviews, no staged photo ops. Instead, she posted a raw, Unedited live stream from her living room. No makeup, no fancy lighting. Just her and Onyx, sitting on the worn couch. She looked straight into the camera, eyes steady. "I'm not a hero," she said. "I'm not special. I'm not magic. I'm just tired. Tired of walking streets where people think silence is safety. Tired of being told to survive instead of live." She paused, voice tightening. "And I know I'm not alone." She talked about the years of ignored complaints, the neighborhoods left to rot, the silent complicity that let gangs like Troy's believe they owned the night. She talked about the women, too scared to walk home alone, the kids who learned early to cross streets when they saw uniforms, the men who were judged threats before they were seen as human. No theatrics, no villainizing, just truth. Hard, heavy truth that settled into the bones of anyone listening. The stream ended with one simple promise: this isn't over. It's just the beginning. And it's going to get louder. The reaction was seismic. The polished news outlets fumbled, unsure how to spin a story that refused to be sanitized. Grassroots movements surged overnight. Neighborhoods began hosting their own live streams, their own community patrols, their own truth-telling forums. It was messy. It was raw. It was real, exactly the way Amara wanted it. But not everyone was pleased. Behind closed doors in polished offices, powerful men and women frowned at the screens. They had seen movements before. They knew how dangerous they could be, not because of the riots, but because of the hope. Hope, after all, was contagious, and people who hoped were harder to control. At the same time, in a different part of the city, Troy sat in a holding cell, hands cuffed to a steel bench, hatred burning brighter than ever. Behind his bruised eyes, he watched the small mounted TV through the bars, forced to see Amara's face again and again. In his mind, he wasn't the villain. He was the victim. The world had turned upside down, made his kind the hunted, made hers the rulers, and he swore, silently, viciously, that if he ever got out, he'd make sure the balance tipped back the other way. He didn't realize that his time was already over, because the future wasn't waiting for permission anymore. It was tearing through the city like wildfire. As Amara walked the streets with Onyx that night, she saw the signs of it everywhere. Fresh murals, chalk drawings, on sidewalks, flyers for neighborhood meetings and community patrols. Everywhere, the message was the same: loyalty over fear, voices over silence. We protect us, and under it all, a growing certainty. The city was changing. Slowly, painfully, but irreversibly. At a small corner where once she might have felt unsafe, a little boy no older than 6 ran up to her, a crayon drawing clutched in his hand. It was a picture of her and Onyx, crude, bright, full of hope. "You're the lady with the brave dog," he said shyly. Amara knelt down, accepting the picture with a lump in her throat. "No," she said softly, smiling at him. "We're all brave. You are too." The boy beamed. Somewhere behind him, his mother wiped a tear from her eye and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." The night wrapped itself around Amara and Onyx like a warm, living thing. Not perfect, not safe, but alive, and full of a promise she could feel thrumming in the cracked sidewalks and humming streetlights. The world wasn't built for people like her. But she would help rebuild it anyway, brick by brick, bark by bark, step by unbreakable step. The city skyline gleamed under the afternoon sun, but in the offices that mattered, the ones with marble floors and bulletproof windows, the mood was anything but bright. Behind polished oak doors, men in tailored suits and women in crisp blazers whispered nervously over steaming cups of coffee. "This can't continue," muttered Councilman Briggs, wiping sweat from his brow. "She's stirring up every damn neighborhood we spent decades pacifying." Across from him, Police Commissioner Hale leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Containment," he said calmly, "always starts with narrative control. And how exactly do you suggest we contain a woman who's got half the damn city filming her every move?" Another official snapped. Silence fell. They all knew the problem wasn't just Amara, it was what she represented. Proof that the old fear didn't work anymore. Proof that loyalty and courage were more contagious than compliance. Meanwhile, across the river, Amara sat at a rickety table outside a bakery, sipping bitter coffee and sorting through a mountain of papers. Onyx lay at her feet, twitching in his sleep, chasing dream enemies through some other world. Beside her sat Javier, Rosa, and Malik, their faces lit with excitement and nerves. "This isn't just Park Row anymore," Malik said, tapping his tablet. "It's spreading. Harlem, Bronx, South Side, even a few neighborhoods across state lines." He swiped through videos, marches, community patrols, live streams exposing crooked landlords, and negligent precincts, all tagged with variations of Tucker loyalty over fear and Onyx justice. Amara watched quietly, pride swelling in her chest, but she also knew what success attracted. Enemies. She didn't fear Troy anymore. She feared the ones who wouldn't come at her with chains and gas cans, the ones who would smile as they slipped knives between her ribs. That night, her fears found shape. A letter arrived at her door. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a grainy photo of her walking Onyx near the community center. A single line, typed in cold black letters, "Stay in your place." No signature. No threats. Spelled out, but the meaning was clear. Stay small, stay silent, or pay. Amara held the photo up to the light, studying it like an ancient map. Then she fed it slowly into the shredder, piece by piece, until nothing remained. She didn't need proof of fear. She needed proof of power. And that was already spreading faster than any threat could stop. By dawn, her plan was in motion. She wasn't going to wait for them to come for her. She was going to beat them to the punch. The next day, Amara called a press conference, not through official channels, but right on the courthouse steps. No permits, no security, just a crowd. Hundreds packed the plaza by noon, spilling onto the streets, chanting her name, Onyx's name, the movement's name, phones raised, cameras rolling. She stood on the cracked marble steps, Onyx seated regally at her side, facing a sea of people who had chosen hope over fear. When she spoke, her voice wasn't angry. It was calm, patient, unbreakable. "I have been followed," she said simply. "I have been threatened." The crowd stirred. "But I am still here." Cheers erupted, fists raised high, and I am not alone. The cheers grew louder, echoing between the courthouse. In columns like thunder, Amara held up a thick manila folder for all to see. "In my hand," she said, "are records, emails, audio recordings, documents." She paused, letting the tension build. Proof that what happened on Park Row was not an isolated incident. Proof of systemic neglect, of deliberate failures, of corruption that didn't start last month or last year, but has rotted this city for decades. Reporters pushed closer, microphones thrust toward her. She smiled thinly. "I'm releasing it all, today, to the public." And just like that, the ground shifted again. In the tower offices overlooking the plaza, the officials watching from behind tinted glass swore under their breath. They had prepared for riots. They had prepared for lawsuits. They hadn't prepared for evidence, receipts, timelines, paper trails leading straight back to their doors. Across the internet, the files exploded. Names, dates, actions and inactions laid bare for anyone who cared to look. It wasn't just Troy and his gang exposed now. It was the officers who ignored complaints, the council members who redirected patrol funds away from black neighborhoods, the landlords who let buildings rot because they knew no one would listen when tenants screamed. The city's dirty laundry flapped in the digital wind for all to see, and there was no pulling it back. Later that night, Amara sat by her window, watching the city pulse and churn under the weight of its own rebirth. She wasn't naive. She knew the backlash would come, smears, legal threats, maybe worse, But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a voice shouting into a void. She felt like a conductor leading a symphony built from rage and hope and bone-deep loyalty. Onyx whined softly in his sleep. Amara smiled and whispered, "You did good, boy. We did good." The city shifted under the weight of truth, and it was only just beginning. Far below, on the cracked sidewalk, someone had spray-painted a fresh new mural. "We protect us. We are the storm." And for the first time in a long time, the city trembled. Not with fear, but with possibility. The first blow didn't come with fists or fire. It came with headlines. Amara Reed, troublemaker or hero. Dog-wielding vigilante undermines police authority. Sources say activist tied to radical groups. Lies, half-truths, smears wrapped in respectable fonts and broadcast with polished smiles. Within 24 hours of releasing the documents, Amara's name was dragged through every gutter publication and evening news program with corporate ties to the old order she had exposed. Anonymous experts were paraded on television, questioning her credibility. Online trolls flooded her live streams. With death threats and racial slurs, her personal information leaked, home address, phone number, even the names of some of her allies. It was coordinated, it was deliberate, and it was exactly what she had expected. Amara didn't flinch, didn't waver. Instead, she turned every attack into proof. Every smear became another brick in the case against the system. On her live streams, she calmly showed screenshots of threats, broken timelines from hit pieces, even payment trails linking certain media sources back to the very politicians her evidence had exposed. She didn't shout, she didn't cry, she let facts do the bleeding, and the people responded. Across the city, murals of Amara and Onyx grew larger, brighter, more defiant. Activist groups organized defense squads to monitor her building, creating a wall of presence day and night. College students set up digital task forces, tracking troll accounts back. To PR firms and political operatives, every attempt to break her only revealed how deep the corruption ran, and how many were willing to fight back. Meanwhile, inside a crumbling City Hall office, Commissioner Hale scowled at the growing unrest. "This should have buried her," he muttered, slamming a fist onto the oak desk. Councilman Briggs, pale and sweating, stared at the reports. Protests swelling at government buildings, city employees leaking more documents to activists every day. "She's not just a woman anymore," Briggs said hoarsely. "She's a movement." And that, they realized too late, was something you couldn't kill with bad press. Movements didn't die from bruises. They sharpened their teeth on them. On a rainy afternoon, Amara sat quietly inside the old community center, now buzzing. With volunteers and journalists sorting through more files, Onyx lay nearby, worn but watchful. Rosa approached, holding a battered folder. "You need to see this," she said, voice tight. Inside, memos outlining secret deals between the mayor's office and real estate developers, emails between police captains arranging accidental downgrades of assault charges in poor neighborhoods, photos of beaten protesters, evidence scrubbed from official reports. Amara closed the folder carefully. She knew what this meant. This wasn't about Park Row anymore. It was about everything. The city wasn't just corrupt. It was built to be that way, and if they wanted a change, they'd have to tear it down to its bones. That night, Amara addressed the city again, not from a courthouse, not from a studio, from the cracked sidewalk where it had all started. She stood on a makeshift platform, rain dripping from her jacket, hair plastered to her forehead. Onyx sat alert at her feet, unmoving. Cameras flickered in the crowd. Phones streamed the moment to millions. Amara's voice was hoarse but steady. "They tried to burn me down," she said simply. "And when that didn't work, they tried to bury me." She lifted her chin higher, eyes gleaming with fierce pride. "But they forgot something important." A pause, thick and electrifying. "You can't bury a seed." The crowd roared. Umbrellas dropped. Fists rose. People chanted her name. not out of worship, but as a signal to each other. We're here, we're ready, we're not afraid anymore. Inside her building later that night, Amara scrubbed mud from Onyx's paws and whispered, "They're scared, boy. Not of me, of us." Onyx thumped his tail once, heavy and sure. Far across town, Councilman Briggs poured himself another glass of scotch with trembling hands. On the TV, Amara's speech replayed again and again, cutting through every carefully crafted line like a blade. Commissioner Hale picked up his phone, dialing a number he'd sworn never to call. "If we can't smear her," he said into the receiver, voice low, "then we'll silence her some other way." The voice on the other end was cold and steady. "Understood. Leave it to me." The game was changing again, and Amara was ready, because she hadn't built her strength on applause. She had built it on silence, on scars, on loyalty that didn't vanish. When the lights went out, and she knew when the next attack came, and it wouldn't find her alone. It would find her standing shoulder to shoulder with an army they could no longer control, an army that looked like the future, an army that had teeth, and they were ready to bite. It didn't come with sirens. It didn't come with screams. The next attack came quietly, almost politely. It started with small things, a hacked email account, a scheduled speaking event suddenly cancelled due to security concerns, volunteers receiving anonymous threats, their families harassed by concerned citizens pretending to be journalists. Shadows moved where none should have been. Unmarked vans loitered near the community center after dark. Phone calls with no voice on the other end, just breathing, low and mocking. The old tactics of intimidation, honed over decades, resurrected like ghosts, clawing their way back into the present. They couldn't arrest her without cause, couldn't openly smear her without triggering another backlash. So they tried to break her spirit, slowly, subtly, death by 1,000 invisible cuts. But they didn't understand Amara Reed. They didn't know she had already lived through worse storms, storms that didn't make the news, storms no cameras captured. They didn't know she had buried too many pieces of herself to ever fear losing what was left. They didn't know that loyalty, once sharpened by betrayal, became armor no bullet could pierce. Inside the community center, the core team regrouped. Rosa slammed a hand against the old conference table. "We're losing momentum," she snapped. "People are scared." "We're not losing," Malik countered, voice shaking slightly. "We're adapting." Javier flipped through intercepted emails, highlighting patterns of interference. "They're using proxies," he muttered. "PR firms, anonymous, concerned citizens groups. No fingerprints." Amara stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, gaze unflinching. "They want us chasing shadows," she said, "fighting ghosts, burning ourselves out." She tapped the table sharply. "Not this time." The room fell silent, waiting. Amara's voice was low but lethal. "We stay public. We stay loud. Every threat, every hack, every intimidation, we live stream it. We make their tactics visible." She leaned in, eyes glittering. "We don't just survive their fear, we put it on display." Within hours, a new project launched, Operation Mirrors. Every attack on their network was documented, screenshotted, mapped, published openly on a public site, titled Receipts for Justice. Each anonymous threat countered with 1,000 loud declarations. Each shadowy move exposed to the blinding light of mass attention. They turned every whisper into a bullhorn, and the city loved it. At first, the opposition doubled down, hacking, swatting, leaking carefully edited scandals from Amara's past. Old parking tickets, out-of-context clips from college debates, photos cropped to imply scandal where there was none. It was laughable, transparent. Amara addressed it all with the same devastating calm in a 2-minute live stream. "I'm not perfect, but neither is your system." Then she smiled, a sharp, cutting thing. "And between my imperfect humanity and your perfected corruption, the people have already made their choice." The clip went viral instantly. 24 million views by morning. Inside the mayor's office, a junior aide turned pale as he scrolled through the latest polling numbers. Approval for the sitting leadership. Freefall. Approval for Amara Reed. Meteoric rise. He turned to his boss. What do we do now? The mayor didn't answer, because deep down he already knew it was over. Not officially, not immediately. But the old power was dying, suffocating under its own rot, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Meanwhile, in the streets, change pulsed like a second heartbeat beneath the city's skin. Neighborhood patrols grew stronger. More women and men ran for local office. Ones the system hadn't groomed. Tenants sued slumlords and won. Citizens filmed every stop, every search, every interaction. The city, once ruled by silence, was learning a new language: visibility, resistance, solidarity. One night, as Amara walked home with Onyx, she passed a mural freshly painted on the side of an old library. Her silhouette, head high, dog by her side, walking through a burning wall, and underneath the words, "She didn't walk through fire, she carried it with her." Amara stopped, staring at it. The rain began to fall, cold and clean. She lifted her face to it, letting the water wash away the grime, the exhaustion, the endless pressure. And for a brief, perfect moment, she smiled. Not because the fight was over, but because she finally understood this wasn't her burden alone anymore. It belonged to everyone who refused to bow, everyone who chose loyalty over fear, everyone who carried the fire forward. Back at her apartment, Amara dried Onyx off with a towel and whispered, "They tried to make us afraid, boy. Instead, they made us unstoppable." Onyx thumped his tail once. In answer, steady, sure. Across the city, old powers crumbled in silence. Indictments were prepared. Elections shifted. Landlords sold their properties at losses. Police captains quietly resigned before scandals caught up to them. A silent war had been fought, and the victors weren't the ones with the most guns or the tallest buildings. They were the ones with the loudest truths, the ones who chose each other over fear, the ones who realized that loyalty wasn't just survival. It was revolution. The future had teeth, and it was finally gloriously sinking them in. The city looked different now, not polished, not perfect, but alive. Weeks after the collapse of the old power structures, after the headlines faded and the news cycles moved on, the real work began. It wasn't glamorous. No cheering crowds, no flashing cameras, just tired hands painting murals, just worn voices at town hall meetings, just quiet conversations in once forgotten parks, now reclaimed by the people who lived there. Amara walked those streets daily, Onyx always at her side. She stopped for every handshake, every whispered thank you, every nervous student who asked for advice, every grieving mother who shared her story, because the revolution hadn't ended, it had only evolved. One afternoon, Amara visited the old Park Row corner, the place where it had all started. The rusted street lamp had been replaced with a new one, bright and steady. A small plaque had been mounted nearby. Here, silence ended. Here, loyalty began. At the base of the pole, people had left offerings, flowers, handwritten notes, sketches of Onyx. She knelt, running her fingers over the worn concrete, feeling the memory of that night still pulsing through it. The fear, the anger, the choice to stand. She remembered it all and smiled, not because she missed it, but because she had survived it and thrived beyond it. Later that evening, at a packed community meeting in a refurbished gymnasium, Amara stood behind a battered podium. No microphones, no stage lighting, just people, all shapes, all colors, all histories, gathered under the same cracked ceiling, breathing the same air, dreaming the same dreams. She looked across them and spoke. "We're not here because we wanted heroes," she said quietly. "We're here because we wanted each other." A ripple moved through the room, heads nodding, hands squeezing tighter around loved ones. Amara continued. They tried to teach us that survival was enough, that living small was safer, that if we stayed silent we could live longer. Her voice hardened. They were wrong. A murmur of agreement swelled. We deserve more than survival. We deserve to thrive, Onyx barked once, a deep, resonant sound that drew a wave of laughter and applause. Amara smiled. He's right, she said. Thriving isn't something they can give us. She pointed to the crowd, to the young mothers clutching their babies, to the elders who had seen too many cycles of broken promises, to the teenagers vibrating with restless energy. It's something we take. After the meeting, people lingered in the parking lot, unwilling to let the moment end. Street musicians played. Children raced each other between lampposts. Food vendors handed out steaming plates of soul food. No charge. Amara leaned against a wall, watching it all. Javier approached, hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets. You know you're still the symbol, right? He said, grinning. Amara chuckled. I'm not a symbol, he raised an eyebrow. Could have fooled me. She shook her head. I'm a mirror, she said simply. People see themselves, their own power, their own loyalty. She looked out at the laughing, arguing, dreaming mass of humanity. They don't follow me, she said. They follow the part of themselves they almost forgot was there. Javier smiled, soft and proud. Still, you gave him a hell of a reason to remember. In the days that followed, Amara stayed true to her promise. She didn't chase fame, didn't run for office, didn't sell her story for movie rights. She stayed local, tangible, present. She helped build neighborhood councils that bypassed corrupt city structures. She taught self-defense classes at the community center. She mentored young women who were ready to lead their own fights. And always, always, Onyx was there, patient, loyal, a living reminder of the night the city changed. Seasons turned. Winter came with its brutal winds, testing the resolve of the movement. Spring returned with stubborn flowers pushing through cracked sidewalks. And one summer evening, under a sky painted gold and pink, Amara led a march down Jefferson Avenue, the same street where Troy and his gang had once ruled with fear. Now it was filled with laughter, banners waving, drums pounding ancient rhythms into the concrete. Onyx trotted proudly at her side, wearing a new harness stitched with the words protector, fighter, family. Somewhere along the route, a little girl ran up to Amara, clutching a worn notebook. Can I be like you? She asked breathlessly. Amara knelt, taking the girl's small hands in her. Oh, you already are, she said warmly. You're strong, you're brave, you're enough. The girl beamed, hugging her fiercely before racing back to her family. Amara rose, heart aching with something bigger than pride, something closer to reverence. This was the legacy, not monuments, not awards. People, changed, empowered, awake. Later, that night, sitting on her stoop under a velvet sky, Amara watched the stars prick through the dark. She sipped lukewarm tea and scratched behind Onyx's ears. You tired yet, old man? She teased. Onyx yawned dramatically, resting his head on her knee. Amara smiled and leaned back against the cool brick wall. The battle wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time, the city wasn't waiting for a savior. It was saving itself. One step, one voice, one act of loyalty at a time. Across the street, under the old mural of her and Onyx, someone had spray-painted a fresh line in bright white paint. Legacy isn't built on fear. It's built on loyalty. And beneath that, in smaller script, and loyalty has teeth. Amara closed her eyes, breathing in the heavy, hopeful air. Tomorrow the fight would continue. Tomorrow new battles would begin. Tomorrow the world would demand more. And tomorrow she would answer, not as a hero, but as a woman who refused to be silent, who chose loyalty over fear, who taught a city to protect its own, one bark, one stand, one unbreakable bond at a time. The future wasn't coming, it was already here, and it had teeth.